You're good, we're good.
Okay. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so it's recording pause up there.
Oh, I'm ready.
There we go. Oh, there we go. All right, now we're going. We'd like to welcome everyone to the August 7th, 2024 Kaufman Heights City Planning Commission work session. And we have a couple of items during the work session to take care of. We'll talk through the agenda for today for the business session. Some updates on short-term rental and the town center update. So in getting started, just kind of reviewing the business session agenda, obviously our general public comment, and then we've got a gate that we're going to talk about for 3.1 project SPL 24-001. We've got some minutes to approve. If you guys have had a chance to review the minutes, I'm assuming, and we can make any edits now or then if you need. But with that, you want to take us through on our project for today, and then we'll go straight into short-term rentals in the town center. And just for time, we're starting at 5 here, so we've got 3 items to cover. So
Okay, thanks. All items are mine tonight, so you're gonna hear a lot of me talking. I apologize preemptively. The first one is the business item for tonight. It's a private security gate proposed on Orion Circle, which is actually, there was a window in that wall. You could see it out the north end of City Hall. It's a new subdivision. It's called the Butler Hills View subdivision, being developed right adjacent to City Hall back there. The portion of the circle shown on the screen here where it turns north of the City Hall access road is a private road. And that's what's known as Orion View Circle.
And it may be good to just mention, this didn't come through planning commission because it was a minor subdivision. So it was, I think it's 5 lots in total. So the entitlement process there doesn't require planning commission. So if this isn't looking immediately familiar, that was why it just went through staff several years back.
Could I just ask one of mine? Of course.
Of course. Click on it.
Where does the private road start?
You see the line.
The gate where that's, oh, down there. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
down at the bottom there where it curves to the north there.
So everything else that's south of that is public and is
Is-
taken care of by the public snow
When they-
plows and all that.
Yeah, when the subdivision was done, there was some dedication. That was actually utilized by City Hall, but private up until that subdivision came through.
Okay.
I think there were some easements or things like that in place. I don't know exactly, but there was some dedication done at the time. But everything to the north is still private, and you can actually see in black, it's easier to see on the TV screen, these property lines here encompass the private street. So they're part of all of the subdivision parcels. So it's 3 lots here, and then the other 2 lots in the subdivision are accessed from the street down below, from Butler Hills Drive. And the proposal is to install a gate, an access gate where the red line is shown, basically where the cul-de-sac opens up back there. There was previously, before this was a development, a fence or a gated access there before, so you couldn't see back into that lot. There had been a gate there historically. The homes now are, one is finished and will be on the parade of homes coming up here. Another one has received a permit, and then we anticipate the 3rd one will be in review shortly. So the subdivision's under development. This project has been developed by Ivory Homes, so Ivory Homes is the applicant. The request is pretty straightforward. If it's dark on the
I
screen.
think it'll catch, oh, it's there, but just, Alex, have you seen this happen before?
Something like dimmed for flashing vision.
Oh, yeah, it's done that to me if I use my slides too quickly before. It thinks it's like flashing, but.
Do that.
There we go.
Nope,
Oh.
doesn't like it.
Stick back.
Well, it is pretty straightforward. I can just walk through it and hopefully the screen turns back on. Again, the request is installation of a private access gate. Back up because that last screen was It's all dark, we're in the dark now. This gate is not proposed to swing open one direction or the other, it's proposed to slide horizontally east to west, getting a little better. So it will slide along a horizontal plane, so, a few things we've looked at in previous private gate applications is, swing diameter and making sure cars aren't getting stuck in a swing zone and there's not cars parked in that swing zone. That won't be applicable here, it'll close over the road and then, open just horizontally directly to the west. The narrative also describes a pedestrian access gate on the east side along the sidewalk there. Okay, I'm gonna try to move on now.
Mike, I've got a question about that, just.
Yeah,
Just watching that property over the years, it looks like there's some grade changes, and I'm not sure if that was Ivory or predecessors, but I mean, there's some dirt that's been moved around there, and I'm just looking at I looked at where a gate would potentially go.
yeah.
And I'm wondering just in terms of, have you guys addressed that from a staff standpoint?
Yeah, so there's a grading plan as part of the subdivision. Obviously, they've put in the roadway infrastructure, so there's curbing and the actual cul-de-sac is there.
Mhm.
The gate will require a mechanism, a structure to extend past the right of way to the west.
Okay.
When that structure is put in, there will be some retention work installed between the new development area, this subdivision, and the existing home to the south. So that the slide mechanism will be located directly adjacent to the existing fence of that home that's back there right now. Right now, there is a slight grade difference between the property and some points.
Mhm.
A lot of that is still undisturbed from its existing state, but there are some rocks and things like that. That will all be retained as part of the building permit for that lot.
Do you have any guidance in terms of how who will be responsible for maintaining that? I mean, it's a typically the person above has to maintain like the rock wall and.
Yep.
Is that, I mean, I don't know that we've been that specific in our code about the maintenance. I mean, we have been about the responsibility for the gate.
Yeah.
But also, up to and including if there is some drainage that's directly into that area, is that fall on the one homeowner? And then also the fact that appreciably changed their potential building envelope because it's kind of a long, narrow lot. I saw some challenges with it. I'm really curious about.
Yeah, so regarding grading, if we can get this up, I can show that, but there is a note on that particular lot, on the lot where the gate will be located, that any grading they do has to be properly retained, and that is subject to review before that home gets a final inspection.
Okay.
So, regarding the site grading and elevation, most of that is caught on that building permit rather than in this gate application.
Okay.
I'm just gonna try stopping sharing and starting again, but sometimes is a good. Sometimes it will work, so we'll give it a shot here. We're really glad Alex is here to help us, because I would be completely unsure.
So it's work.
Let's see, I think we've updated a setting hopefully, so if you want to advance the slides. let's
Yeah,
see.
and to answer your other question, Commissioner Mills, setbacks, even though the road is part of this parcel, setbacks are derived from the edge of the private roadway.
Okay.
So we're treating. It's part of the legal parcel that you
Okay.
can see here, but the setbacks are derived as if this were just a normal, public cul-de-sac, so.
How about the setback from the south there, the property line?
That's a typical side setback.
Would there be any additional restrictions because of the presence of the gate? Do we have any potential concern about if they dig a foundation that's maximized in proximity to the?
I would say no, because the location of the gate would be in the front yard.
Okay,
I mean, the slide mechanism would be in the very, very front yard of that property,
okay,
mainly in a kind of a park strip area that's right now rock landscaping. So it's not going to interfere with any building setbacks. It's mainly in that private right of way.
do we have any concerns about fire turnaround?
Turnaround has been approved, and there are some recommended conditions that address what the fire department needs there. They need emergency access, a Knox box mechanism where they can get into that gate at any point when there's an emergency. And we've recommended ensuring There's a building permit reviewed by all departments. They get clearance from fire department as a condition of approval.
I'm gonna choose, let's see if it.
All right, we're still viewing it. The gate itself is pretty standard. It's a 6-foot gate, 39 feet in width, which is about the width of the roadway where the cul-de-sac starts to widen out. It's just a black wrought iron gate, so it's a fairly straightforward, but there's transparency to it. Planning Commission approval is required per Title 14. Gates are allowed on a case-by-case basis on private roadways, subject to Planning Commission review, so that's why it's in front of you tonight. We've done maybe a handful of these in the city's, more recent history, but we don't get this a lot.
I was just gonna try to move this black box so that it's not covering any text.
Mike, does this have an HOA to maintain the gate as well as the road back there?
So there will be, and maybe the applicant can speak to that exactly tonight. One of our conditions is for them to submit a maintenance plan, so we know how the gate will be maintained. I don't know about an HOA specifically. Staff has looked at this. The things we typically look at for private gates are the swing zones of gates, any traffic backup. We don't want a line of cars trying to get into a private area to back up onto public rights of way. Where this is a 3-lot subdivision, we don't anticipate much of an impact in that regard, and there's a pretty long private driveway before you even get to the proposed location of the gate. Again, the gate swings horizontally on a slide plane. We have recommended several conditions here. The first two are kind of redundant, but we felt it was important to distinguish them. One, that the applicant obtain a building permit before the gate is constructed, subject to review by all departments. Two, the applicant shall comply with all fire department standards specifically to provide emergency access. The applicant shall submit an operation and maintenance manual for the proposed gate. And then upon any malfunction, the gate shall be programmed to remain in the open position. So if the gate isn't working or whatever, we want that to default to the open position. So, residents back there can get in and out of their cul-de-sac.
I'm just curious, how are they gonna get access for garbage?
Yeah, that would need to be coordinated with all of those services to provide that access. This is not a public street, so trash collection and things like that are privately arranged by the residents back there. And that's something that they would be obligated to just work out on where the trash collection occurs and how the trucks get back in there and all that.
Is addressing an issue in there as well? with-
Addresses have been assigned. That happens at the subdivision level.
Okay, do
So
they have
that-
like a public box? for this as well?
I don't know what the mailbox plan is for those lots. We could ask the applicant that in the business meeting, but the roadway has been named. It is a named roadway now where it hasn't been in the past.
We typically don't see, I'm sure as you're aware from construction projects of your own, we typically don't see those boxes going in until everything's kind of said and done too, just to minimize disturbance. So I don't know that they are even up yet, but in the business session, I'm sure the applicant can clarify that for us.
That's all I have on this one. Any additional questions?
I just had a couple. Is there gonna be like some kind of phone number on the box itself or residents, if there's an issue with it, how they would know who to contact?
Yeah, good question. Staff's finding is that would be covered in that operation and maintenance manual that we'd review
Okay.
to make sure those things are addressed.
Okay,
Again, something good to pose to the applicant.
okay. All right, and then is there gonna be, I mean, this probably maybe isn't relative to our decision, but that residents have ability to remote open the gate for like guests
Mhm.
or Amazon deliveries?
Yeah, good question. I don't have the specification of how the gate functions, if it's code-based or a manual entry or wireless entry or whatever.
Probably not relevant to our approval, but I think that's more curious.
Yeah, a couple of good questions. Where this is the only business item on the business session agenda, we should have ample time to hear that in the applicant's narrative and get those questions answered.
And when, along with the fire department standards, what about police? Do they have the same ability to access gates like fire?
Yeah, they'll review. They're covered by,
By the all city departments.
Emergency services, maybe that should be more broad, and you could certainly amend that second recommended condition to say fire and police department.
Well, I mean, I guess
Standards.
it's covered by.
So we intend to cover that and have everyone look at that as part of the building permit.
So I have a question as well. Do we have any guidelines about gates and size and dimensions and?
Oh, only what I referenced that
So it's a case by
it's
case.
case by case, subject to planning commission review, and they're not allowed on public streets.
There have been some changes at the state code level within the past handful of years that also limit a municipality's ability to impose architectural guidelines on single family developments. There are some carve outs that allow us to do that in certain circumstances, but I think the natural question that would follow is, oh, well, should we look at adding those to our code? And I would say we can certainly look into it if that's the direction we receive as staff, but we may run into that issue with state code that puts some limits on cities' ability to do that.
I did clarify from the project manager that it will operate primarily through remote signals for homeowners of the associated lots. So
But that doesn't cover a guest. How does a guest get it?
that's true. A call box and keypad, it says.
Then where are they gonna place that? Because usually it's remote from the gate, so.
Yeah.
So that you can use it while you're sitting in your car, and that would put it on the property that's outside that cul-de-sac.
Yeah, we can take a look at that. They own that private right of way.
It's tricky because as you're driving in on the right-hand side, typically you have to put an island in the middle. And we've got a pretty narrow road to begin with, so I think it's unrealistic. Somebody's gonna use a keypad on the right-hand side of their vehicle, so. I'm not trying to perseverate over what seems to be a super nice ad for that little stretch, but we've got a lot of these little pieces that used to be, some form of rural back in the day that are being converted. I think we'll see more things like this, little less than 10 units, and making sure that we're all comfortable with our playbook for this.
Yeah.
And asking lots of questions. So I appreciate everybody engaging. I think this is not necessarily precedent setting, but just from a hygiene standpoint, these are good discussions to have.
Yeah, lots of great questions helps us inform too, like what additional information for future staff reports would be helpful to have. We don't get a ton of the gate ones, so it's always a little bit of like, oh, what do we, what's relevant here? So this is helpful for us to know what questions are on your minds.
It seems to me that there are a lot of little gated communities around, so I'm surprised that you're not getting more or not, that it's not a
Some of
issue.
Are from years back when process may have been different. I can't speak too much to the history there. And then some have come through with the subdivision itself, and so they aren't pulled out as like this separate application. It may have been considered at the time the plat came through and may have been less like glaring because of that. But we certainly do have them throughout the community, and yeah, we see them.
Any feedback from, I didn't see anything in comments, but because it's already been developed, did we need to notice the?
This was fully noticed, yeah. We got one written comment that came in after the deadline, but it came in from the neighbor to the south adjacent there.
Okay,
Their main concern, and I'll send the comment to the commission, they didn't mind the gate itself going in. They were concerned about some of the rock landscaping that right now is pushed up against their fence. And I did get that clarification today that that's one of the conditions on that building permit, that a retaining structure will be added there to pull the rocks off that fence.
awesome.
So we feel that that's been pretty well resolved. But no other comments were received.
Maybe good to just do a reminder for anyone in the audience about the public comment policy. So public comments are just due to be sent to the commission in advance of a meeting. They just need to be submitted by 12 p.m. the day prior. So that's 12 p.m. on Tuesday to be forwarded over to our commission. If they're sent after that deadline, we still add them as part of the public record. They are just forwarded to you all after the meeting. And the rationale there is to give you all enough time to read the comments before the meeting happens. So.
Okay. Would you like to talk short-term rentals?
Yes.
We'll move on to that. Let's see if that, okay, I gotta reshare.
Alex is gonna fix the black box.
Driver me now.
I wasn't sure how to do it, Alex.
I have to share a different presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this item is not on for any vote or consideration. We don't even have a draft ordinance at this point, but a month or two ago, there was a policy level discussion with the city council on the topic of short-term rentals and the city's current short-term rental policy, the enforcement environment and challenges with that, and discussion on whether we want to consider revisiting our short-term rental ordinance and our policy just based on those factors. I'm gonna walk through some of them.
Can you give them a little bit of history and color commentary on just kind of how we,
Yep,
I don't know that everybody in this room was involved when we were kind of, putting this together, and then the efforts of the state legislature.
yeah, so I've got some background here on what previous feedback is, what our existing ordinance says, and some ideas for a new ordinance as well. So previous council feedback, this dates back a little while, was to refine policy recommendations to help enforcement challenges and address current concerns and impacts of illegal rentals. And maybe at this point, I will jump to our current short-term rental ordinance, because we do have an ordinance that allows short-term rentals. It's very limited, and this ordinance has been in place since, before the rise and prevalence of VRBO and Airbnb and those kind of services. Just being where we are geographically, the city has always had a demand for vacation rentals. So right now, the current ordinance states that a short-term rental is anything that's rented for fewer than 30 consecutive days. They are allowed via business license and conditional use, but only in areas that are zoned for multifamily development that contain at least 8 units and all access via a private roadway. What that does functionally is really limit areas in the city where legal short-term rental licenses can be issued. We have, I would say, just over 100 legal licenses in the city. Most are at the Oaks at Wasatch condominium development, the old Canyon Racket Club condominium development, and then Canyon Place, which is down by the High T intersection on Wasatch Boulevard. There are others in different areas of the city, but those 3 developments see most of our active licenses. There are no owner occupancy requirements in our current ordinance. The owner does not need to live on site to be able to be eligible for a license if it meets the other criteria. There's no parking allowed on public right of way, and that's covered by the fact that these are only allowed today in private developments. There's a requirement that posted license and contact information is visible, and there's a 24/7 hotline in case issues arise that somebody is available locally, even if the owner is not. Right now, the current ordinance states that operation of unlicensed short-term rentals is punishable as a Class C misdemeanor upon conviction, with each day representing a separate violation. That's what the ordinance says for enforcement. The reality of enforcement is much more challenging than that. And I'll talk about that, but first I do want to note that we, maybe on a small handful of instances in the past, have we had any issues with licensed legal short-term rentals in the city. We have many calls and many issues with rentals being operated in areas where they are not allowed by ordinance, predominantly single-family neighborhoods, public streets. So they're operating without a license. We're not aware of them. So that's where we get most of our enforcement calls, is illegal rentals. The licensure process and conditional use process covers any concerns and questions, compliant rentals pretty well. Some additional challenges in enforcement, and kind of the reality of it today is there is a state code provision that's been in place since about 2018 or so that prohibits a city from using an online listing of a short-term rental as the sole basis for enforcement. So we could see a property on a website, the address could be there, a picture of it could be there, it could have reviews and everything. We cannot use that as a basis for enforcement. We being the city and the city's code enforcement division is obligated to gather evidence of actual use of a property as a short-term rental that violates our code for enforcement. And the website listing alone does not meet that criteria. That's a state code limitation. And that's a pretty big one. Because gathering evidence is challenging in some cases, and is very time consuming in others. The way our enforcement works right now is, say evidence is collected, it is then referred over to the city prosecutor through the criminal citation process and processed through the justice court. While we have an ordinance that states the penalties for illegal operation of a short-term rental, the assessment of that penalty is ultimately at the discretion of the courts and of the judge. And what we see fairly regularly is the penalty is not anywhere close to the maximum that our ordinance allows us to assess.
Maybe just a good reminder too, as far as courts go, we use the Holiday Justice Court, so I get asked the question a lot, where's the court in Cottonwood Heights? So we contract over with Holidays, so it's offsite.
So this is a perpetual challenge, and these calls come in all year round, and these calls ramp up about November and December every year. There are admittedly a lot of people that don't know the city's short-term rental ordinances. They don't know that using a single-family property in public street is not allowed right now for a short-term rental. So there are instances that they're informed and that rental is shut down, and enforcement works there on a more informal basis. And there are others, your kind of problem children situations where people do know the rules, and we see things even this week. We've seen an instance of a single family home being rented out to dozens of people, parking blocking mailboxes and driveways and things like that, and then direction for the occupants not to engage and talk with any city officials that show up. Other tricks like signing 30-day leases and then just violating those leases and vacating those before the 30 days is up, which makes it really hard, even if it's on a website and even if we see that and know what's going on to meet that bar of enough evidence to warrant enforcement. Adding to that, the city's enforcement staff is a staff of 2 that doubles animal control, and you can see why enforcement is challenging in the current kind of regulatory climate. A few things have happened since this ordinance has been proposed. One, obviously, being the rise of these kind of third-party sites to make these rentals really easy. Another one that is relevant, and I'll get back to why, is we have since adopted an ADU ordinance that a couple of years ago, prior to 2020, accessory dwelling units were not allowed in the city. There was a state code update on those that required cities to allow accessory dwelling units as a permitted use in all single-family residential zones in every city throughout the state of Utah. The main difference here is an ADU is a rental for more than 30 consecutive days. It's a long-term rental. It's a basement apartment, a mother-in-law apartment, something like that. So the city drafted an ordinance in response to that state code. Primary differences here, other than it's only applicable to long-term rentals, is owner occupancy is required. The legal owner of the property has to prove as much as we can require proof that they are the permanent year-round resident of the home that the rental is being operated in. That license is tied to that owner, so when ownership changes, the license needs to be updated for new owners. We require a signed affidavit to further ensure that the owner acknowledges the owner occupancy requirements and all the standards that they must meet. We require one additional parking
internal
stall.
and 2 additional for detached.
And then we require business license, inspections, walkthroughs, that kind of thing, to make sure the spaces that these accessory dwelling units are located in are code compliant and safe for occupancy.
Maybe one other distinction that would be helpful here. What's the difference between an ADU and someone who rents a single family home to 12 people?
Yeah, good question. An ADU is an allowance for 2 families to be occupying the same home, even if it's a single family home by zoning. Now that we get into the definition of what a family is, and the state code tries to define what a family is, and it is either a group of people that are all related by blood, marriage, or adoption. There's no maximum number. If they're all related, they are considered one family. Or it's up to 4 people that are not all related. So you could have 2 couples, you could have 4 roommates, any combination up to 4 do not have to be related. They're still considered a single family. But you cannot now have a group of people all unrelated plus 4 unrelated individuals without an ADU license, without the legal owner of that on site, living on that property. But But that is a good distinction because there are situations that the term mother-in-law apartment comes from the concept of renting out to a family member. That's all considered one family. It's not, you know, technically an ADU, but when they go to rent to a second family, it becomes. I will say it's not listed here. We have occupancy requirements for short-term rentals right now too. I think it's up to 4 bedrooms and no more than 12 people in a short-term rental unit. Which may weigh into kind of the ongoing discussion. So I want to get back to some previous council feedback. Enforcement is very challenging. We are in an environment right now from a regulations and a policy level, and the fact that these website services are prevalent and they are here to stay, where our enforcement cannot keep up with the rise in how many of these units we see. Planning department staff and the police department staff have kind of gotten together and proposed a number of things for consideration by the council, not necessarily recommending or pushing this, but just ideas to kind of help update our policy to reflect the actual what we're seeing out there and add things in there that may allow short-term rentals in more areas, but will resolve hopefully some of the concerns that we see in today's practice. Those ideas include increasing penalties for unlicensed short-term rentals. And we have done this a number of times and can continue to do that. We will run into the same, you know, the enforcement challenges of having those penalties assessed, but continuing to increase that penalty again sets an expectation that the city is serious about enforcing illegal rentals. Explore expansion of areas allowed in the city with additional regulations added to address most common concerns, preserve neighborhood character, mitigate parking issues, you know, the party house concern, the nuisance, the lack of pride of ownership, those kind of things. To do this, there's one provision that is really important. That's owner occupancy requirements. So expanding any short-term rental ordinance would certainly come with a recommendation to mandate owner occupancy to ensure that the legal owner of the property is on site at all times.
Which I do think it's worth noting could have a potential benefit of like revenue staying in our community. If you have a requirement that the owner occupy the property, seemingly the revenue that you're getting from having a rental there would be similar to an ADU in the sense that it's more income for residents. Whereas if how we have it today, short-term rentals don't have to be owner occupied. So we do a lot of times see it with, you know, an offsite owner who may not live here, which isn't inherently an issue, but there may be a benefit to having that owner occupancy if it were tied to increasing revenue options with housing cost constraints.
Yeah, this is certainly, you know, one of the things that this achieves, maybe not the primary purpose of this, but, you know, there is an ADU ordinance is one of a city's options to demonstrate that it is implementing policies that help with housing costs and affordable housing policies. You know, an owner occupied short-term rental ordinance could be argued to do the same thing. And then requiring licenses for these would be key. And that helps not only ensure that the places that these things are being operated in are up to code, are safe for occupancy. It also ensures that they're properly registered, that the city's collecting, you know, sales taxes, transient room taxes, things like that. And that licensure requirement now provides another layer of enforcement options. So now if we do see theoretically, if we see a unit listed on a website and we know the address of that, we can verify very quickly, is there a license for this unit? If there's not, now you do have evidence that there is potentially illegal operation and a pathway to say, okay, go to the city, follow the code, you need to meet these standards and get your license. And then additional parking requirements certainly would be explored as well. Offsite parking is a big concern. We hear that a lot. We've heard it a ton with the ADU process. So again, something we would work on and develop as part of any potential ordinance.
You have a question, Commissioner Shelton?
It just seemed like the thing with those recommendations is that they don't very well match up with the issue you have. The issue you have seems to not be those that are willing to license.
Sure.
Those people have been in pretty good shape. And the increased fees relates to the other problem, which you talked about, which is it's really hard to enforce.
Mhm.
So it seems like none of those really attack the real problem. They may attack the people who are doing it right. And for instance, if you required them to live on site,
Yeah,
that would shut down a lot of them that are complying and playing by the rules.
sure, I see what you mean.
So yeah, that's an important clarification. I think if we expand this policy at all and go that direction, we would have to reconcile it with those licensed units that have been existing for years and make sure it's differentiated. The owner occupancy may be a single family standard only, or, in certain areas you have to be owner occupied. But if you've been in these areas previously, these multifamily areas, meeting these conditions, maybe it's the same process as it is
I
today.
don't know that there are even recommendations yet.
There are not. These
I
are
think
ideas.
It's
These
very
are-
much like, we did some research into what other cities have been doing. And kind of just are like, here's what we're seeing, different directions. Ian and I both went and looked into sister city or neighboring cities, but I don't feel that I have looked at it closely enough to say like, this is what I recommend. It's sort of like, here are a bunch of options we should talk about.
I think the consideration is to require owner occupancy in the single family zone, but then in the multifamily zone where we do allow it right now, that wouldn't be a requirement.
But what do you guys think? I mean,
I
what
think-
other ideas?
Commissioner Sheldon's point, I think the identifying the bad behavior, my understanding is, just from experience at Big Comma Canyon, that they're doing a fantastic job of enforcement. But they're without, skirting the rules, but there are, to my knowledge, organizations that will help you identify where the rentals are without just doing a flat out Airbnb or VRBO search.
Yeah,
Have
there's
we
some
contemplated
software.
that?
And I know some other cities have used it. I don't have any experience with it, but I would be curious to know if that would be a helpful tool.
So that's number one. Number two, this I think has the ability and also the risk, to Commissioner Shelton's point. This is gonna be a drag on resources unless it can at least become a break-even proposition, which means that however it's taxed, it needs to be able to deal with the fact that we've got two people that are already overworked right now. And
it
this
is,
is going to
yeah.
increase, so. the
It is
ability-
today a tax on city resources
Yeah.
with enforcement alone. So one of the other things this addresses is acknowledging these are here. We're gonna keep dealing with this issue. We don't know if the spaces people are in our city are safe or up to code in any capacity, and we don't have a good mechanism if no one answers the door to be able to do anything about that.
I do wonder if, and I don't know if this is what the direction you guys want to go or not, I'm just throwing it out there. I wonder if one benefit to looking at expanding the ordinance to provide kind of an option in single family neighborhoods would be creating a pathway to compliance for the non-compliant ones doing it. If we know that there's people renting out single family homes today, and our options are seemingly sort of limited for enforcing it, or we run into issues, would it be helpful to be able to say to them, you have options, this is how you do it, or would that?
My guess is that the reason you hear about this so much is not because people are worried that they're unlicensed. It's because they worried that they don't want them.
Sure,
So giving them a pathway doesn't solve the complaints either, because the
Sure.
people who don't want them will not find that to be a really adequate solution.
I see what you mean.
I do think there is a fairly elegant, but maybe not in this framework, answer to the problem, and it's not my answer, but I think it's really a good thought. One of the challenges is to enforce, you have to go to someone who has rented this home in their mind legitimately and say, you can't stay here. And that's a really big enforcement issue. You're gonna throw someone out of the investment they made and make them go attack how they're gonna get their money back, or where they're gonna stay. So it's a really difficult thing to enforce that way. The idea that I think makes a lot of sense is you go at the companies who are advertising these properties as available as doing something that is false advertising. If you go to Airbnb and say this, you are advertising a property here that cannot be short-term rental, we're gonna go after you for the problem. That's how you're gonna shut down.
And I wonder if that's an option we have within the state code limitations or not.
That's very difficult
It's a
today.
city problem. It's not
That
not
is
easy
a-
for the city to solve that.
That's a
It's
state level
statewide
effort.
issue.
There's some comments down at this end
Yeah.
of the table too.
Just a question, it seems illogical that you can't go after somebody who listed as such, but I'm picking up from what you just said, that the state legislature did that to you.
It's really hard.
That's right.
It's tricky. It's like you can't, I think it says you can't use it as the sole,
Primary.
the primary basis.
It's not proof that they committed a crime, they're just
It may
advertising
be able
it.
to be a factor of the investigation, but it sounds like it can't be the primary piece of evidence.
Well, it seems like that going after it for false advertising is an avenue that you could use that. I'm just kicking that around. I don't know.
So this is all just context for the discussions that have been happening at the council level. There's been, and I'll turn it back over to you for questions, but this is kind of a list of, if we had to draft an ordinance framework today, it would kind of contain these things, and we think that would help address a lot of the really bad instances we see of these. It does allow these to be, would allow these to be operated in a much wider area of the city than is currently allowed by code, but maybe not currently allowed by illegal practice. We see these things, they exist, we know they're there. We don't know if they're safe, we don't know what condition they're in, there's a lot of concerns there. So you will likely see as a commission this come back. The council is interested in getting public input on it. To do that, we run it through the planning commission process in some sort of draft ordinance format. But before we bring a draft ordinance in front of you, we thought it was important to give you context for why we're exploring this. And it's a complicated issue, and there are valid concerns and valid points and arguments for and against doing anything with short-term rentals, and we're trying to navigate that all.
Commissioner
So
Steinman.
yeah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of cities handle this in many different ways, anywhere from Park City to Anaheim to Salt Lake City. And there's the two issues. One is going to be health, safety, noise, parking, and just all of the things that you can kind of accommodate with a building code or just a license to be able to jump into it. But also it's how do you manage the execution? And I think, the two ordinance and then the police officers that are working on this, it's an education disconnect. And I think that that's one of the main things, San Diego, they don't really allow many short-term rentals in any of the residential communities. However, people now basically just underwrite the purchase of the properties to say, we're okay to have $1,000 penalty, 3 times a year, because we're making $6,000 a night on this property. So you're going to now continue to push against all the noise complaints that are going into place on this. So people are going to, I know of many illegal single-family homes, and they're charging between $600 and $2,000 a night here in Cottonwood Heights right now that are illegal. So with that being the case, what can we do to basically give them the education and say, all right, instead of underwriting it, what if you do a licensure that's going to be based on revenue and say, hey, here's all of your compliance, here's the affidavit that needs to go into place, here's the parking response. You now have additional penalties because of parking. And then it's basically just a letter. You don't have to do anything, sending anybody out there. Basically, if there's anything that's reported on this property, it's a letter that's sent out because they sign the affidavit on it to get their license, just as a business license would be in place, to then be able to then just create more kind of stringent rules, but more education behind, all right, we need to make sure that this is up to code. We need to make sure that we're paying appropriate taxes on this. I think that that's a better route, and I've seen Anaheim does a really good job with it, where anytime that you sign within Anaheim, any type of a short-term rental, you basically sign a 3-page affidavit as the renter that basically says noise complaints after 10 p.m. You now have a $50 fee if you have any noise complaints after 10 p.m. for however many days. But if we standardize some of those practices and say, if there's noise complaints, that's a $1,000 fine, and that just starts adding up. But then at the end of the day, we're not sending people out to manage that. It's the pre-disclosure that any of our short-term rentals basically signs up through Airbnb with that pre-disclosure to say everybody in the city, and I don't know if there's just zones, but what if it was the whole city? Whole city could be short-term rented. However, there's large licensure fees to be in the city to rent an Airbnb, just like I believe Salt Lake City allows this right now. Most of the HOAs will manage appropriately from this, but the HOA would then say, there's no short-term rentals, or here's our additional policy or additional, kind of cutouts that they put into that. But I think if we charged higher amounts for licensing and give better education to then say, here's that affidavit to then make it so that we have better tax basis and we don't have all the management issues with police and that's what I've seen. And there's a lot of cities that are doing exactly that. And I think we can learn quite a bit from them.
Yeah, no, that's great. input.
We'd be happy to look at other cities too. That's
The
what.
city of
commission-
Brighton has a 3% collection, and with my little condo at Solitude, whether if you rent it through Solitude situation, they take care of paying that, but they are aggressive
That
about
would be a good-
enforcement.
Yeah.
What I would love if we can, let's find out who is in the most legal way possible, the most aggressive about making sure that people are playing by the rules.
Yeah, we
And,
researched Brighton's, that $600 daily fine.
I love that, by the way. I think that's. I
St.
think
George
that's
pretty
great.
aggressive about it.
But the enforcement,
His workplace is always
if there,
really tough.
I really don't appreciate the fact that the city prosecutor is taking upon themselves to reduce that
It's not the city, it's the courts.
for the courts,
It's
that
the
I
judge.
hope we can communicate that it's like they're not representing the interests of the city in a judicious manner, and whatever we can do to communicate that appropriately.
Sure, and I'll need to research more on that side of
Sure.
things. It's not.
Because if we can't enforce it, I mean, it concerns me that process of, hey, $1,000 fine 3 times a year, we can live with that. As we approach the Olympics in the next
Yeah.
10 years, I guarantee you we're gonna be talking about this 5 years from now.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be add a 0 or 2 to every problem that we're talking about. And whether it's on the revenue side or the expense side, we will be talking about it.
May I ask just for clarification, kind of on what direction you want us to take as staff? Is the consensus from the commission that you'd like us to do maybe some more research into what other cities are doing? I mean, we kind of just started scratching the surface with it. That's kind of what I'm hearing, is that maybe some more information would be helpful. I'm not hearing a ton of consensus around one specific approach.
I like what you guys have up there. I think you've thought, this is really well
Yeah.
thought out, and I haven't had a ton of interaction with council members on any of this stuff, but that's a good, strong list. I appreciate the parking. I appreciate the posting, the annual inspections, I think you guys,
Yeah.
that's a pretty solid list.
I think too, it's also gonna require community support. And that I feel like could be a big hurdle. If we don't have a pretty big stick, I think, too, in terms of the short-term rental. Because I'm not sure of anyone who would say, I'm all for, bringing that
Expanding
into,
that.
bringing that. So I think we just have to think
Yep.
through what requirements we put in place to make it so it's very clear to residents and they understand how enforcement will happen.
I guess that's the good news of it going through a public process, is that there's a reason
Absolutely.
it goes through that, and that hopefully it's strengthened and benefited by the feedback that y'all get and the council gets through that. Because I think we often hear really insightful comments when we bring these things
Absolutely,
forward.
yeah, absolutely.
So that is the goal, that's the direction. This is context for that direction. You'll
Awesome.
see. It's not that the staff or even the council's pushing this one direction or another, just that, revisiting these policies, based on what we're experiencing out there and the challenges and the really negative instances of this that we see, we're trying to develop policy that's responsive to that and responsive to what's going on in every city. So we'll continue to research. Your suggestions have been great. But you guys are right. It's a framework of what regulations need to be in place, and then what do we do on the enforcement side to make sure those regulations stick and are followed. So this has been really helpful.
Great work.
Okay, we will be back with more short-term rentals at a future date. With the last few minutes, I just want to give the commission an update on Town Center.
You good if we move on to that, Chair?
Yes, please.
We gave this update to the council last night as well, so this is kind of next steps in that process. I'll share this now. Okay, as we've reported in the past, the town center project, the city is now pursuing a general obligation bond to help subsidize some of the public improvements on this project to help make the developed vision a reality. So what's been done on that there, and these are just highlights. There's a lot more information to dig into here that we won't have time for tonight, but we have finalized site plan concepts and project branding. You know, we're referring to the project as the Heights. There is a website with a lot of really good information, chTownCenter.com. And then there's updates on the city website as well. For those of you that were at Butlerville Days, there was a booth for the Town Center project front and center as you walk into Butlerville Days. And we saw a lot of engagement with a lot of people in that booth to walk through the process that the city's gone through to develop these site plans and walk through the proposed bond and what it would help pay for and why it was why that direction was given by the council.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
Because I did attend it. It was a great booth and the people that were there were fabulous. But a lot of feedback was given.
Yeah.
About like I think there were two proposed plans,
Yeah.
A and B.
Yep.
So does that feedback go back to the committee that's
Yeah, it will to the project team, but the idea here is A and B are two options that provide very similar, the same square footages, the same amount of open space, the same amenities. It's just to demonstrate that there are multiple ways to achieve the town-centered vision. It has not been narrowed down to one option or another. The bond and the vote is not option A or option B. They're two options of the same concept, showing the level of density and the types of uses and the amount of open space and how the space feels. There was also an article, if you've received the August newsletter yet, the front page article is all about this project, both the project itself and the bond and why the city is pursuing that. At council last night, the preliminary direction was given to pursue a $30 million bond with a 30-year term. Those are maximums that the city could pursue if voted affirmatively. Next steps. And this is basically next steps through the next 2 weeks. And then there's a whole lot more that happens from that point. There's a public open house next Monday here at City Hall. It's just an open house format from 6 to 8 p.m. Where the public will have an opportunity to come in and learn about the project, learn about the bond, learn about the financial impacts of the bond, how that impacts property taxes and city taxes and finances and things like that. All information that's on the project website, but will be in a open house format, staffed with people there to be able to answer those questions. We are now coordinating neighborhood meetings with advisory committee members. Advisory committee members can go out and hold meetings on their own, doing the same thing with each council member to hold district council meetings. We are refining and finalizing a frequently asked questions page to be published on the project website. And that'll get into some of those technical questions of, more than the elevator pitch level discussion of what is a general obligation bond? What does it mean? How does it impact me? What does it get the city? What happens if the bond goes through? What happens if it doesn't? It gets into that type of information. I believe you'll start to see printed informational signage out there to publicize this effort by the city, so people can have a resource to go learn more about it and know what it is and be familiar with it before the ballots show up. We will then, at a technical level, draft the ballot language that's pretty restricted by state code requirements on how that's written and what goes on the ballot. We'll also be present at a bunch of different city events here in the next several months, including the rec center. Park at the Park we're planning to have a presence there. We're planning several events at Hillside Plaza itself this fall. And then the council will vote on the bond parameters resolution in 2 weeks on August 20th. This is the formal vote to say we want to place this general obligation bond on the ballot for this year. We have until August 22nd to send that information to the Salt Lake County Elections Office to ensure that that goes on the ballot. And that takes us from there. And then there will be a lot of public information and additional opportunities for for education from that point all the way through the election. So again, this is just a very high level overview. I encourage you all to visit that website, attend the open house if you're available and interested. And if there's any questions, you can reach out to us at any time.
For the record, I wanted to put the booth on a pool float and float it around the pool at the rec center, but I'm running into some barriers.
Just in reference to your question about the A and B, the options, the advisory committee, just as we were asked at one point to go stand by the one that we were in favor of, out of the 12 of us, like 9 of us stood right dead center in the middle. Like as we had negotiated and got feedback from the contractors and everybody involved, we were pretty happy that we could live with both options, and there's enough flexibility to do a lot of different things. And at the end of the day, these are just hypothetical. Some people are very dismayed that there's not more detail, and it's just, these are artist renderings. They aren't like in stone. You said you were gonna put my donut shop right here in that building, and you know, it's hard to make financial decisions on hypotheticals, but I mean, we try to put their feet to the fire and our staff's feet to the fire about trying to commit as much as we reasonably can without being disingenuous about what we can realistically say we're gonna do until we're actually in the process, so.
Any questions? Yeah.
Silly question, but is there any start forward time frame for this that we're gonna,
Oh, that's a
we
great
gotta have it settled
question.
by September 26th?
Sure, so.
Whatever.
A very
So
important
the kind of
question.
high level runway, calendar, or plan on this, the results of the election influence a lot. If it passes, then we have a certain direction. If it doesn't pass, then we have another direction to figure out. But the idea would be, between now and the election to put out some sort of RFP document to find a development partner that can implement the city's vision there, contingent on, the bond passing and certain things happening to begin that selection process. And then bonds, if voted on in November, cannot be issued until January or February-ish. So that's kind of the time frame on that. And then it would be as quick as we can, tie up loose ends on leases and relocations and demolition and development partners. And there's still some question marks there, but the idea is if the bond passes and this is the direction that the city goes, to jump in as soon as possible and be very aggressive in implementing this vision.
So under that, it'd be sometime late next year, probably.
You could, I don't want to commit to anything. You could start to see some preliminary, site
Can you tell
improvements
he's
start
been
to
asked
happen.
this
Yeah.
before?
It's
You
hard.
might have.
Yeah,
Are there any long-term leases in there currently?
there are, I will say, yes, there's one that has several years that we're working with to try to figure that out. Most of them are on very short-term leases that are not a concern.
Hope to see you guys on Monday. For the open house. Was it just over in the community room? Okay, yeah.
You guys have enough understanding of like the pros and cons of us owning this property versus not owning this property, that your ability to answer things maybe in a stronger and more educated voice than even members of the committee can. That us owning this property changes the game in terms of what goes on that property. And if we don't own that property, the limitations in terms of what the law allows for what we can control can and can't be there, even with form-based code. So that basic point is not something that's completely understood by probably 99% of our residents for the why are we doing this?
Super cool opportunity.
I will just share, especially after the vote on the 20th, when this becomes an official, resolution by the council. If you have your city hat on, our role is educational, not persuasive. If you have your resident hat on, you can share your opinions either way on this, but just take note of that. There's some restrictions on how we can engage with the public. It's very focused on education.
Makes sense.
Okay, I think that brings us.
Okay,
Thank you all.
are we there? One more motion for the work session?
Move to adjourn?
We have a motion to adjourn
I can-
and a second. All those in favor of adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. See you back in a couple minutes.
And then I'm just gonna put, I don't know if y'all know this, but I just put the leftover meals in our fridge in the break room. If you didn't get a chance to eat before the meeting,